Hello everyone, welcome to Insights Alley. In this series about startup basics, we will try to understand and learn from insights shared by various phenomenal people around startups, product, growth, sales, strategy, and everything in between. My name is Arun Verma, and let's get started. In today's episode, we will talk to Nick Franklin, who is the founder and CEO of ChartMogul. ChartMogul is a subscription analytics tool for reporting on your most important SaaS metrics. We will talk about all the basic SaaS metrics in this episode with Nick. So here is the episode. Hello Nick, welcome to Insights Alley, and thanks a lot for taking out some time for doing this. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me, Aaron. Great to be on here.
So, Nick, would you like to start with telling us your story in brief from your early career to Zendesk and then ChartMogul, and what are you doing these days?
Sure, yeah. So early career, I actually studied computer animation and then illustration in college, but I was getting nuts towards the end of my studies, not so convinced that I want to go into a creative field, but was getting more and more excited by software and the technology industry. So I spent some of my college days creating like a social network for artists and illustrators where they could share their work. And then as soon as I graduated, I got a job at a company called True Knowledge, which became Evie, which was like kind of it was like 2007, artificial intelligence, natural language question answering service that was eventually acquired by Amazon and became part of like the Amazon Alexa team.
Oh, nice.
That was in Cambridge, UK. So that was kind of my first real job that wasn't, washing dishes or working in a shop or something like that. Proper salaried office job after graduation. And then while I was at True Knowledge, I was sort of in a knowledge engineer role and then a product management role. And while I was in the product role, I purchased Zendesk as part of my work there and just fell in love with that software. And after Zendesk in 2009, they raised their Series A and they began to hire more people. I was one of the earlier hires at Zendesk, and they hired me to run their European sort of sales and customer service. I did that for nearly 2 years, and then I moved to Asia and ran their Zendesk's Asia expansion, which was mostly we opened up an office in Tokyo and then in Manila in the Philippines to service the Southeast Asian market mostly. So that was really fun and exciting. I was almost five years at Zendesk, growing from like 9-person team to about, I don't know exact number when I left. I left about four years ago. It was about 700 people and we'd gone public. So that was an exciting journey. And all that time, my heart was still kind of in product and building things and designing things and wanting to make things, I guess. Mm-hmm. I'd kind of seen this need for something like ChartMogul, which is the business that I run today, which was that, we had built out using some sort of early cloud BI tools, some kind of dashboard for measuring our subscription revenues, our MRR growth. But it was maybe not particularly the best user experience and wasn't real time. And if I couldn't really edit things myself. So it was like, if I wanted to see, what's the average revenue per customer in like Hong Kong versus Singapore or India, something like that. It was hard to get those answers myself. So I kind of felt like, there's got to be a better, working at Zendesk, where Zendesk was really kind of like trying to bring the kind of consumerization of business software into a new domain, which was help desk customer service software. Right. And I just felt like, it just hadn't happened yet in the BI business intelligence analytics space. And I just felt there's sort of opportunity there to create something that brings those same values that Zendesk had around simplicity, good design, ease of use, lower price, lower barrier to entry, into something that those values hadn't really made it into the domain of analytics yet. So I just felt there was that opportunity there. And then, 4 years ago, made the decision to leave Zendesk and kind of go all in on on ChartMogul and moved to Berlin here. And for the last 4 years, I've been building ChartMogul and doing that ever since.
So let's start with the topic for today, which is around understanding and decoding SaaS metrics for startups. So when one startup is in very early stage, what type of metrics would you suggest founders keep a tab on, and how to think about it? Like, what did you do in ChartMogul itself in your very early stage? Curious to know.
Yeah, I guess what you're trying to get to or validate in the early stages, do you have something that people want? Yeah, so it's basically about engagement, right? Like, how many people are signing up to try your product? Maybe it's a beta version or just an early version. How many people are actually signing up? Is it significant? And then are those people able to onboard? And are they coming back? And I think like if they're coming back, that's like the number one thing. Like, are they logging back in, right? And if they're logging, and how often are they logging back in? Is it every day? Is it like, or is it just once? Or they just log in and then they leave and then they don't come back? So then that's a major problem, right? So I think the main thing is just, are they coming back? Like, you've got them to your website, they've signed up for an account, they've gone through the onboarding process. So they've done all those things, which proves that they're actually, whatever the promise of your landing page or whatever was saying that the thing was going to do was compelling enough to get them to sign up, go through the onboarding process. But is the value sticky enough that they actually come back and they want to keep getting that value? So that was the main thing. How we measured it, I think we just ran some manual reports off our database of like who was coming back, how frequently they had logged in. We might have had intercom early days as well, which tells you some basic stuff around that. But we were just validating with like, okay, so we had a couple of hundred. We're on Product Hunt, early beta, and like how often are they logging back in? Have they invited their colleagues? Are their colleagues logging in every day? And we were fairly lucky in that we could see fairly early on, pre-revenue, that people seemed to like what we'd made and they were logging back in like frequently, like sometimes several times a day. They were checking back in on ChartMogul to see like how the numbers had changed or to do some analysis.
Makes sense. Okay, one detour question. So what is the difference between a KPI and a metric? I mean, I understand there could be many variations of interpretations, but how would you like to use these terms, KPI and a metric?
I mean, anything that you can measure or you can calculate, you could call it a metric. Mm-hmm. But it might not be a key indicator of the performance of your company, right? Key performance indicator is like, or your department or whatever it is you're measuring, right? So it might be that, you can measure something fairly arbitrary that might be a metric. But, like it just might not be meaningful. So I think the idea of a key performance indicator is it is a metric, but it's a metric that your organization has decided is special, right? That has a special status of being something that has some, indicates that some part of your business is performing well or not well, depending on if the metric is going in the right direction, right?
Right. Any examples?
Well, I mean, something like number of free trial signups could be a KPI, or the number of the trial to paid conversion rate, for example, like, are they converting from a trial to a paid account? The onboarding rate, what rate do they onboard? That could be a KPI. The churn rate, so, and in terms of metrics, like, you can have a metric for, website traffic, right? But it's not really a KPI for us. It might be, if you're a media outlet, website traffic is probably really important, but for us, it doesn't move the needle, in terms of like, it's not something we look at regularly, like what is the traffic on our website? I couldn't tell you how much visitors that we get on our website, because for us, it's not really a KPI. KPI for us is more, how many leads do we get? How many free trials sign up?
Right.
But it's still a metric, right? Traffic is still a metric. I think a lot of those things in Google Analytics are metrics, but for us as a B2B company that makes its money on selling subscriptions, a lot of them aren't really KPIs that we track super carefully.
Right. Makes sense. So Nick, obviously when it comes to the entire startup, there are like multiple buckets of metric that are needed to be tracked and analyzed. we just discussed in very earlier stage, it would be product usage related metrics, right? Then later on you'll have to have some marketing related metrics also, then overall financial or accounting related metrics, then obviously all these buckets there are. So that you guys also help SaaS businesses track all these MRR, ARR. So my question is, how would you advise founders to think around this whole thing? What are these different type of buckets in the first place, and which are the ones that are important in the earliest stage, and how do you gradually move on to the including others as well?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there's a few different types, right? There's usage-based metrics. It's like which generally is on measuring kind of like how are the users navigating around your website or inside your product, right?
Right.
And that's usually using some sort of JavaScript embed or some sort of pixel or something to track usage. And the departments that care about those things mostly, it's kind of traditionally marketing for the public facing stuff, and then product for the in-product stuff, right?
Right.
And the things both of them care about tend to be a little bit different, but quite similar. Like you might measure a funnel, like people that go onto this landing page, how many of them sign up and how many of them complete these steps, et cetera. Or if it's in the product, how many of them who, activate this feature or create a new record or whatever, complete some step in the product to get further onboarded and further invested in the product, right?
Right.
And for that, there's a ton of free and paid solutions out there.
Right.
And I think as soon as you start having usage, there's no reason not to embrace those. So Google Analytics, obviously the obvious one, it's free and everybody uses it. On the paid side for engagement, there's things like Heap. We use Heap. There's also Mixpanel and Kissmetrics and other things like that. And then there's some that specialize more with more marketing focused and less product focused, and there's some that are more product focused and less marketing focused. Like more product focused would be like Amplitude,
right?
In terms of like the sort of packaged BI prices. There's a lot of things out there that cover that. You might not need really early days one of these solutions. I think we use Heap for both the public and the in-app, I believe. But and then the other type of data you might be collecting is, once you start getting trials or paying customers, is revenue data and payment data, which is where ChartMogul and other products like ChartMogul allow you to plug directly into your payment system, be it Stripe or Recurly or PayPal or iTunes Connect or whatever you're using to bill your customers, import that revenue and payment data and get a ton of value. We'll automatically measure MRR, churn rate, cash flows, etc., on top of the revenue data. So, and I don't think there's any real reason not to start doing it right from the start, because, for example, like our product is free up until you get past $10,000 in MRR.
Okay.
So there's no downside really there to using it. There's only upside. You get a ton of insight about your business for free. And then if you talked about financial metrics, I think I don't really think of financial metrics as metrics, because they're kind of like almost, they're kind of codified in like accounting principles and things like this, like GAAP and ASC like 606. So it's like you kind of have to do this stuff to stay compliant as a business. Okay. I think when you're very small and you have very low revenues, you can sort of do cash-based accounting. And it becomes quite easy. ChartMogul can show you that, or you can pull a report directly from even some people, even from your bank statement or whatever, how much, or from Stripe or something like this, to allow you to do that. But then, as you start to get into a few, $1 million or plus in revenues, you generally want to follow good accounting guidelines around, how to recognize revenues and expenses and things like that. We offer a revenue recognition product, but there's a ton of different products out there that allow you to do revenue recognition for your financials. But I think in the early days, for the first year, unless you're very successful, usually most companies that we speak to end up just doing fairly basic accounting, like cash-based accounting or something like that in the first year of business, where they're not worrying too much about getting like GAAP rev rec schedules set up right at the start.
I'm curious to know, so all these MRR, ARR data, what would be the upside in using, like, from the very first customer or like first 10 customers, when as you suggested, you should be using a tool like ChartMogul from the very first go? What could be the upside?
I mean, to using like a subscription analytics product.
Right. Like in the
product,
very early stage when you are iterating your very first version of the product and you're just having like 2-digit customers, what could be the upside?
I mean, like if you just have 1 or 2 customers, there's not as much upside because you can kind of see that they're in your billing system. But once you start to get like maybe 5, 10 customers and you have a mix of annual and monthly, you have to then do some calculation to calculate things like MRR. And if maybe you get a customer cancel, then you can start to measure churn rate. And there's just a lot of, average revenue per customer. There's just a lot of different things that you kind of want to, once you start to get, 10, 20, 30 customers, it becomes that you either have to run exports. Right. And then every time you want to like real-time numbers, you have to like update it with the latest data. Has a customer upgraded or downgraded or canceled? Or have you got a new customer and then you load their data in? And why would you want to spend that time maintaining an Excel model to get your kind of, main subscription metrics when you could simply plug in Stripe and have it do it for you for free, right? So I think there's just time. I guess the main upside is time saving. And sure, if you just have 1 or 2 customers, maybe it's not like it's super valuable, but it's just one of those things to not have to think about, I suppose. It's also fun to see your business grow in ChartMogul. I think it's fun anyway.
Right. Actually, I think it's a very nice pricing strategy also, just hooking the user under what's your revenue number that you provide free product before?
$10,000 in MRR.
Nice. So like you're just hooking your customers when they don't need that much, but as and when they reach that stage when it's absolutely critical for them to be able to get these numbers, they're already using ChartMogul. Makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean a ton of people may never get there or take a very long time to get there, and that's completely fine too. Like for me personally, and for a lot of people at the company, it's really fun to have like these thousands of people that are like just using the product, digital nomads, or just people just starting out, or just people that are doing just a smaller business or a side business or whatever. It's exciting. It's exciting to have them, and sometimes they share their stories with us or on Twitter, and it's fun. So a lot of it's about having some fun with giving back to startup community. And yeah, sure, some of them do eventually upgrade to paid account, and that's great, and that supports our business model. But if they never do, that's also totally fine.
Right, makes sense. So let's talk about these key metrics: MRR, ARR, CAC, LTV, and whatnot. What is MRR and ARR, and what does it consists of? Its importance. What does it say? Can you please elaborate?
Sure. I mean, MRR stands for monthly recurring revenue. It's a sort of normalized version of your subscription revenues. By normalized, I mean you might have some annual subscriptions, in which case you divide them by 12, to get the MRR. You might have some monthly subscriptions, so that's just pretty much just the monthly price that the customer is paying. But you also might have some, foreign currency subscriptions that you want to convert the currencies into your primary currency. You also have things like upgrades and downgrades, and you want to sort of figure out like what is the to normalize that and make it into a monthly recurring revenue number. Another way to think about it is like if all your customers were subscription customers and all of them were on monthly billing and none of them had failed payments or anything like that, and none of them canceled and none of them upgraded or downgraded, and you didn't get any new customer either. Like it's a theoretical thing, but if that was the case, no failed payments, it's the amount of money that you would make next month.
Right.
Something like that. In reality, of course, you get some change. People downgrade, they upgrade, you get new customers. Some customers cancel, unfortunately. You get lots of different stuff happens. So this is why it gets a bit. You need like a software like ChartMogul or BI team or something to put together an accurate reading of your monthly recurring revenue. But the good thing about it, the reason it's useful is it kind of shows like much more than cash flow. For example, the performance of your subscription business very, very clearly. Right. It's like it's forward looking. It shows you like where things are going. Whereas cash flow, it could go up and down. Like you might have a bunch of annual deals one month and you get a really good amount of cash collection one month. And then the next month it might go right back down again. Doesn't mean you're doing any worse as a business. But and then ARR, actually there's two meanings to ARR. There's the one I like to use more is the annual run rate, or the annualized run rate, which is basically the MRR times by 12. So if it's like 10K MRR, that's 120K of annualized run rate. So you just calculate the MRR and you times by 12. The other meaning is annual recurring revenue, which is perhaps not used as much by the kind of high volume transactional SaaS businesses that most have a lot of monthly subscriptions.
Mm-hmm.
But I think traditionally the measure is that with annual recurring revenue, you only look at the annual revenue that is also recurring. So you'd exclude monthly subscriptions from that. For that reason, when the vast majority of SaaS founders and products like ChartMogul talk about ARR, they're really talking about the annualized run rate, which is just MR times 12 and not the annual recurring revenue, which perhaps means something different. And a lot of people won't have even heard of this second meaning of the acronym. So.
Makes sense. So I wanted to ask, how do you calculate it from a very paper napkin maths point of view to how does ChartMogul does it, calculation of MRR?
Yeah, I mean, there is thousands of lines of code because there's so many edge cases. So for example, a customer might upgrade their subscription halfway through a service period to a higher plan, but they also might at the same time reduce the number of seats or licenses they're paying for, right? Or they might add a discount to their subscription at the same time as switching from a monthly to an annual plan. Or they might do a prorated downgrade to a lower plan while removing a discount, or switch from quarterly to annual billing while also getting a refund for the unused time on the quarterly. So it's there are literally hundreds and hundreds of scenarios.
Right.
So it's easy that we have to solve for. And each billing system has a different set of potential scenarios that they can generate. So Stripe, Recurly, ChargeBee, Chargeify, Zora, they all have their own different ways of doing subscription billing that are all slightly different. Right. So we have a dedicated integrations team of 5 engineers, and their job is just to build and maintain our billing system integrations to make sure that we are accurately calculating MRR for all these different systems. So I mean, back of a napkin, you can do it if it's just you have a monthly subscription paying $50 a month, and you have another subscription that's paying $120 a year, then you can say, okay, well, we'll divide the 120 for the annual subscription by 12. So we have $10 and we'll add it to the $50 and we have $60. So your MRR is $60. So that's how you would calculate it with 2 very simple subscriptions. But then you have to take into account that you get a lot of prorations and all these adjustments and discounts that you have to also solve for. So that's just, we have to listen to all the events and payment data, like the invoices, as well as the subscription events that are coming from the billing systems, and basically use that data to build the picture.
Makes sense. Sure. Can you elaborate on your thoughts on a metric of number of customers, accounts, and average revenue per customer, which is called ARPU? So what does it consist, its importance, and what does it say, how to calculate and all?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty ARPU. We call it ARPU, average revenue per account, but you can call it average revenue per user or average revenue per customer. The way we calculate it is just, so let me think actually. Put me on the spot there. Let me just get it right. So yeah, I mean, it's the sum of all your customers' MRR divided by the total number of active customers. So, so it's the average MRR of your paying customers, of your paying subscribers. And, its significance, I mean, its significance is that in a way, you probably want it always to be drifting upwards and things like that. And by itself, it might not have a lot of meaning, but it depends what you're trying to discover or find out, what context you're talking about it in.
How does it reflect when you have multiple tiers? So let's say one plan is $9.99 and then you have an enterprise plan also. So does it make sense to just take everything under the bucket or just segment that? Okay, for enterprise customer our ARPU is this, and then for our single base user our ARPU would be this. How would you think around this?
Yeah, I think you can do both. I mean, you can easily. It's good to look at both, right? And it's good to, segmentation is one of our big focuses of our product, and also just our philosophy in general is high level metrics that just combine everything together are often not that meaningful.
Right.
Like it's meaningful to say, okay, your ARPU is like, $200 or $100 for the company. But if there's a huge spread, like you have like
Exactly.
if it's like Dropbox or something where they have a consumer thing where they probably have an ARPU of like $2 or $3 or something. I don't know the current prices of Dropbox, but then they have also an enterprise plan where the ARPU might be, $500 or $1,000 depending on, or maybe more. I don't know. Then looking at the average all lumped together, it tells one story, but it's not a meaningful story. It doesn't tell you really what's going on inside the business. So definitely segmenting out the plans and showing, okay, here's the ARPU for the enterprise versus the consumer plan or whatever. And they might be vastly different. And then you can kind of think about them differently and measure them differently and try to drive them up differently, So you might try to get your ARPU from your consumer business from, $2 to $3 or something. But from your enterprise, you might want to get it from 1,000 to 2,000 or something like that. So definitely segmentation is vital. There's other things you can do. I mean, you could segment by country, right? Which region, has, is it worth investing more into Europe or France or Latin America or, Brazil, something like that? What is the average revenue per customer there? Right? If it's really high and you have and there's enough customers there for it to be statistically relevant. It's not just like one big customer, right, with a high average because it's just one. You might want to have like a bit more to start using it for those kind of decisions. But I think that's also interesting.
Makes sense. So Nick, let's move to CAC. So I feel CAC so many times it becomes too vague of a number. So I wanted to know, first of all, what is CAC and what are the different types of measurement could be there? I mean, you could just calculate it by per channel basis, right? Or you could just also account in the overall salaries of the team, etc. I mean, so how would you suggest founders navigate through this and how to calculate and everything?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure I'm the best person to give advice there because we don't always measure CAC. We measure, if we do acquire leads from a Google AdWords campaign, we do measure like the cost per click and the cost per trial sign up. And we can also measure it through to paid as well. So we can then measure we can more or less measure the cost of acquisition, but it's not always super accurate because you don't know if they're clicking on the AdWords thing.
How do you guys for your startup as how do you think through around CAC means customer acquisition cost for people who don't know?
We don't always think about it super hard because the vast majority, 90% of our leads, which are mostly coming in the form of trial signups on our website, they're coming from word of mouth and word of mouth.
Okay, that's interesting. That's interesting.
So it's like the best marketing is just building a really great product and having people shout about it, right? That's that's like Tesla's Elon Musk talks about how Tesla. I mean, they don't really do much advertising, right? So,
right.
Other car companies are advertising, and maybe recently there's been some slightly more less than flattering news stories, but before that stuff started. Teslas was getting a lot of hype because the people that drive Teslas, they just love Teslas. They think they're awesome. And they tell everyone about them. So they have buzz around them. So they don't need to spend money on TV ads, Ford and Chevy and all these companies are constantly creating TV ads. And so our thing has always been try to just have the best product that we can build and the best product in the market. And then people tell other people about it. And so that's meant, I guess we've been a little bit lazy up until now about measuring our CAC.
Okay.
We do one thing that we do kind of do as a rule of thumb because we do spend money on paid marketing,
right?
On Google Ads a bit and some retargeting and I think some other forms of display ads. When we try to think that we want the payback period to be around 9 months, something like this.
Okay.
So on average, right? Some of the customers that we paid to acquire might be smaller or larger, but on average, we'd like to be able to pay back the paid cost in about 9 months. Not including our people's time. Yeah, but our marketing team is really small, so it's not like a large organization where you'd really factor that in.
Okay, let's talk about LTV, lifetime value of a customer. It's kind of my favorite. So could you explain us what is it? What does it consist? Its importance? What does it say? How to calculate and all?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, customer lifetime value is basically what you're trying to do is estimate, if someone, what you're usually trying to do anyway, there's a lot of different meanings to this, but if someone signs up today and buys one of your paid plans, what is the average amount of revenue you can expect to receive from that customer over the course of until they churn eventually? So, of course, traditionally value has meant actually it's like the revenue minus the COGS, or basically times the gross margin, so minus the cost of goods sold. In SaaS, because the kind of incremental margins tend to be very good, because you're selling software, and not you're not selling
exactly.
You're not selling pizza or something where you have to like buy the ingredients and sell it. Although pizza does have good margins apparently, but it's not like you're selling iPods and you have to like buy them and then sell them and you have a margin. So in SaaS, we often just measure lifetime value as really sort of lifetime revenue. And so what you're trying to do is create an estimate. And the simplest formula that everybody goes with is like, sorry, let me look it up, but it's like average cost per account divided by the customer churn rate. So say you average MRR per customer divided by customer churn rate. So if you have a $10 per month subscription on average, and your customer churn rate is 10%, then on average the lifetime will be 10 months, and therefore you'll make $100 of lifetime value or lifetime revenue from that customer. So this is the idea. And if you're going to make $100 from your customer, then maybe you can afford to spend $50 or $60 or $80 or whatever it is on customer acquisition costs. So lifetime value is really there to help you understand how much you should like spend on a big part of it anyway, is to help you understand how much you should spend on customer acquisition. And of course, like just having LTV as just a single number isn't so helpful, because you also need to know the lifetime, like how long is a customer actually going to stay with you. Like if you have a super low churn rate, it might be like that have a really high lifetime value, but it might take you 10 years on average because your customers just don't churn.
Right.
So there might be a theoretical 10 years before you can actually acquire that revenue. So you have to think about like how long is it going to take you to get that revenue, and therefore can you actually afford to spend? You probably can't. If it's going to take you like 10 years to get the revenue, you can't afford to spend 80% CAC, because you can't wait 8 years to get a payback. So you also need to know your lifetime so you can calculate the payback period. The simplistic lifetime value formula that we also have actually in ChartMogul, and where we are planning to create something more sophisticated.
Okay,
is fine if your SaaS business it's kind of a finger in the air a little bit, like calculation for LTV, because it doesn't take into account that the dynamics, which is often that the reality is that some customers basically never churn, or they're really really embedded, and a lot of the churn that does happens in the first like 2 or 3 months because it was a bad fit or they never really got into the product. So the distribution of churn, and then the customers that do stay with you basically sort of forever, they tend to upgrade over time. So this simplistic formula doesn't really take into account like all the different dynamics. So as your company gets bigger, usually you'll create a more tailored formula for your business that works for your business. You might also have non-recurring revenues in there as well. You might have setup fees, like HubSpot is a mandatory setup fee, and that's still revenue that you want to count, right, as part of the lifetime value of a customer. You might have an annual service fee or something like, or annual training fee. So really, like, you kind of want to create a formula that's sort of tailored to your business model. So one of the things we've been thinking about is how a ChartMogul for the future is how can we build a sort of flexible lifetime value sort of modeler into our product, where we can have a very flexible thing that gives a really accurate reading no matter how complex your business is.
Interesting. I'll be looking out for that feature. Let's move on to churn. So like, what is churn? And I mean, as an overall concept, and then exact numeric metric also, because since it's a very important thing for success, failure of your SaaS business, right? Excited to know your thoughts.
Yeah, so churn is sort of like one of the unpleasant parts about running a subscription business. Everyone Every company has some of it once they, get a certain volume of customers. And what churn is, churn is just another word for like subscription cancellation. What people usually talk about is the churn rate, which is the rate at which customers are canceling. Like if you have 100 customers and one of them cancels, then in a given month, then your churn rate is 1% for that month because you lost one of your customers.
What else different type of churn could be there? So like one would be way to look at is this customer churn. Then it could be MRR, dollar churn, anything else?
Exactly. Yeah. Like you have customer churn, also called logo churn. And that's just, number of subscribers and one of them cancels, you lost 1% of your revenue. There's two types of revenue churn that's interesting.
Right.
One is net revenue churn or net MRR churn. And that is basically, it's the sort of the sum of all the churn and the downgrades in revenue. So it's the sum of the MRR that you lost in a given month minus the sum of all of the MRR from the upgrades. So it's offset for the upgrades. So say you have a MRR of $100,000. And you lost, $10,000 in revenue. So you lost 10% of your revenue in a given month. But the customers you kept also upgraded $5,000. So that offsets it. You net it out. So then your actual churn, your net MRR churn rate was only 5%, not 10%. And say you had maybe you had $10,000 of upgrades and then you have a net MRR churn rate of 0%. Or you can even have negative net churn, which is really awesome because even if you're losing customers, your revenue is still growing, something like that. Maybe it doesn't work if the numbers are 10% because eventually you'll run out of customers to upsell to. But like the idea there being like, you might lose, say you got $100,000 in revenue and you lose $1,000 in revenue due to churn, but you upsell your existing customers, the customers that you retain happen to be paying $2,000 more across the board. Like maybe it's like a few of them upgraded by $10 here and there, and it added up to $2,000 in MRR, and therefore your net MRR churn rate is actually minus 1% because you had a 1% upsell on your existing customer base. So that's fine, but it's fine for knowing how that you have a healthy business, right? Like, you've almost kind of created a business that's not as susceptible to the damaging effects of churn as another business might be. But it doesn't really help you solve. It kind of hides the underlying problem, which is that $1,000, 1% of the customer base is actually canceling. So there's another metric called gross MRR churn rate, which basically just takes the sum of all the churn and all the downgrades in revenue and divides it by the MRR at the start of the period.
Okay.
And therefore, it would give you a 1% revenue churn or whatever. And it doesn't offset it for the upgrades. And therefore, you can say, okay, that's the real churn. That's actually what's churn.
Understood. But I think this concept of negative churn kind of makes sense. And SaaS business should be striving for that because it's like your expansion revenue is offsetting the churn that you're having, right?
Oh, it's great. And like when you tell people your churn rate, like just tell them that number, like, cause it's going to sound, and especially if you're pitching, for investment and VCs, absolutely, show your net MRR churn rate because it's going to be way better. And sometimes if it's negative, you just show it off. But internally, when you're talking with your team, your management team,
right,
and you actually want to solve the problems that your company has, then definitely look at the gross churn number because that's where the actual problems lie, right?
Absolutely, it makes sense. I think asking you for a benchmark number for all these metrics that we just discussed would be silly because every industry is completely different. But I wanted to ask you, like, how as a founder you should be thinking about these benchmark numbers. So let's assume I am building a daily planner SaaS tool for single users. So now my monthly churn is, let's say, 15%. So is it good? Is it bad? Like, what about 30%? How do I know? How do I find out these benchmark numbers for all these metrics?
Yeah, I mean, there are some resources out there. I'm trying to think. There's Matrix Partners does a really good one called like their annual SaaS. What's it called? Matrix Partners annual. I think it's just called like annual SaaS survey or something. And I think David Skoke is involved there as well. It's one of like the people that really codified and invented a lot of these SaaS metrics.
Right.
Along with our investor Christoph Jans as well. So like he has that great blog post like for entrepreneurs is really popular. But yeah, they do something called the private SaaS company survey. Okay. So they do it used to be, I guess they work with formerly Pacific Crest, and now it's called KBCM Technology Group. But basically, David Skoke and Matrix Partners, they work with them on basically surveying the CEOs of private SaaS companies to try and get to try and basically get those benchmarks, and they publish them once a year. So that's probably, I think, the most robust public place, and they survey over 400 private SaaS companies to come up with those metrics. So that's a great resource to find out how well they're doing. But generally, 15 to 30% would be really high for B2B product. Okay. Generally for B2B, you want to have the churn rate maybe below 5 or 6% at most. The logo churn, and most of the best, like the highest performing SaaS companies, they'll have like a negative churn or a zero churn, like Zendesk or New Relic or these kind of companies that really perform well in the stock market. They tend to have negative revenue churn. Of course, they have the logo churn can't be really negative. In consumer, it's different. And there are some types of products where they're kind of like frequent use, where you might cancel and then reactivate a few months later when your use case keeps going away and coming back again. But generally speaking, if the use case for the SaaS product is an ongoing use case where you don't want to stop using it, like project management, for example, if it's like that might have a lot of churn because the project might finish and they might cancel, right?
Right.
Things like if they're using it for like an election cycle or something, and the election is finished, therefore they cancel the subscription, right? But in general, if it's an ongoing use case, like our product, you don't stop wanting to measure your revenues, then you just want to continually lower the churn. But yeah, consumer, you might see, I know this 15-30% isn't abnormal in consumer world, but once you get into 30%, in 3 months you're losing most of your customers. So at that point it's kind of like, should you be doing a subscription business at all? maybe it's better to just charge them a one-time fee.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Ideally, right? Like Netflix obviously would just go out of business if people just stayed for 3 months, right? They need people to stay for a long time, much longer than 3 months. So.
Makes sense. Also for the listeners, I think 2 VC firms have very good content around this. One is Point 9 Capital and one is Open View Capital, I think. Yeah.
Open View Venture Partners, right?
Open View Venture Partners and Point.
Yeah. Both of them have really great content, and there's a ton of others too. Yeah, Matrix Partners, David Skoke, and Redpoint, Thomas Tongas.
Yeah, so, exactly. I read his blogs. Great. Let's discuss some metrics which are good proxy for health of your SaaS business. So, could you give you also discussed earlier also, could you give us a glimpse of what is CAC payback period and what is CAC to LTV ratio? Like, what is it? How is it important? How to calculate and all?
So the payback period is just like, how long does it take you to pay back the cost of acquiring the customer if it's a paid acquisition, right. Like if it was acquired via Google or a paid ad campaign. I think it depends like how much funding you have, and so like how much you want to press the gas, as they say, right? Like some I heard some telcos will wait like a year and a half before they like start to make a profit on some of the telco subscribers, knowing that their long-term LTV, people don't usually switch telco, mobile phone provider very often, right? Like if you're with AT&T or O2 here in Germany, then you generally just stay for years and years, so that they know that, they measure that, and therefore they'll pay quite a lot in sales and marketing to acquire you or to get you to switch over from another provider. So I think it just depends. If you're a bootstrap SaaS company, you probably want your payback period to be fairly fast.
Is there a generally accepted healthy number? You were mentioning you had some 9 months, right?
Yeah, 9 to 10 months. I think a lot of companies do go for that. Like even if like we're VC backed company, not like tens of millions, like not yet anyway, like some SaaS companies. But I think generally like most SaaS companies would like to start making a profit within the first year of a subscription.
What about CAC to LTV ratio, if you have any thoughts?
I don't, as I'd have to.
Okay. It's okay.
I mean, I guess I know what it is. It's it's like it's the rate. Like if you spend $100 on acquisition and it's $1,000 LTV, then it's a 1 to 10 ratio or something. I suppose it can be useful to measure.
Right. I think there is a one good lecture by David Skok only around these two metrics. I'll link that in the description. It's okay.
It's not something we have like focused on internally. So.
Right. May I know the reason why? Because I've seen startups, like very fairly early stage startups, like obsessing over CAC and CAC to LTV ratio and all this. May I know the specific reason why you kind of delayed on this or have not been able to do this?
It just hasn't been such a major focus paid acquisition.
Okay.
We spend some on paid acquisition, but we get probably more inbound, free, sort of free. They show up on our website from word of mouth or from
interesting
our content marketing. Maybe they read one of our blog posts or something and found out about us that way. But we get enough volume that way that we haven't needed yet. We're still trying to focus on improving our conversion rates in the people that sign up from the non-paid channels. That we just haven't needed yet to really focus on scaling paid. And therefore, when you do start to scale paid and you do start to do that, you obviously do want to measure these things much more carefully. But for us, and I think it's also important for if you're doing outbound sales, but we don't do outbound, right? If you're building a team of BDRs where you want to, measure whose job it is just to generate leads, make phone calls, send out emails, campaigns, and then you measure them, and then you have like an AE or account exec whose job it is to close the deals. You kind of want to measure that cost, and that's quite a real cost. It's like people's salaries and stuff. So, but we're not doing outbound, we're not doing significant amounts of paid acquisition either. So for us, it hasn't been a major focus, and we've more focused on trying to make it so that the people that do show up for free, or that just show up on our website and sign up, that we give them a great experience. They're able to get it started, to onboard, and then to buy. So that's really been where we've been focusing our efforts to date.
So Nick, how to understand and gauge overall health and sustainability viability of your startup, like by looking at which of SaaS metrics, and how to think around this?
I think obviously it depends. I mean, you got to make sure you don't go out of business, right? And going out of business basically means you run out of cash. So you have to, also calculate your burn rate and your run rate and how much cash you've got in the bank versus your spending plan, right? And how much you're actually spending and what's in the plan, what in reality you spend each month, and how does that affect your runway, and how much revenue do you collect each month, and how is that growing? So you have to build out that financial model. And actually I think we're about to publish a cool piece of content,
nice.
And even about cash flow planning for SaaS startups. So that's something that's coming, I think, very soon if you go to our blog, I think it's blog.chartmogul.com, just to plug it. Week or two, we'll be publishing some pretty cool resources around cash flow planning and financial management for SaaS startups, which I think will be exciting. And so that obviously you got to make sure you don't run out of cash, so don't overspend if you can't afford to. And obviously there are some revenue SaaS metrics that really tell you how healthy your business is. One of them is like your churn rate. Right. That's obviously if customers are canceling, they're leaving, then there's a problem. You need to fix that. You need to address that, because it's hard to grow after a while if you have a churn rate. Like there's something called the SaaS ceiling, which you might have heard of, where as your customer base expands, you have a churn rate, you have to add more and more customers in order to just to cancel out the churn, in order to just before you can actually start growing. So that as your customer base gets bigger and bigger, 10% of 100 is only 10 customers, but 10% of 1,000 is 100 customers. It's like you have to add 1,000, 100 customers just to stay break even, before you can even start growing. So it becomes harder and harder to grow if you have a high churn rate. So in the early days, maybe, it's worth to focus on churn really early, even if it's not that much of a big deal, because obviously in the very early days, 10% churn rate, that's just one customer at 10 customers, right? But so it might actually be easier to add 5 more customers. But when you're at 1,000 customers or 10,000 customers. It's much harder the churn rate is much more important because it's much harder to grow by such a rate. This is why churn, it's worth focusing on the reasons for churn and the underlying reasons for churn really early in the life cycle of your business, even if it doesn't really, it's a bit like a disease. It's something, it's just like, even if it doesn't seem that bad early on, better go get it fixed. something like that before it becomes a big problem that's really, really hard to fix. So churn's important, growth rate's important, profitability. I mean, even if you're not, actually profitable because you're VC backed, but just generally the kind of profitability of the enterprise, even if you're not, technically profitable, are you spending, too much? Are the dynamics, is the business model grounded? In most SaaS, it is, because most SaaS doesn't have to worry about that problem. But like Groupon had that issue, right? Where, you were buying Groupons and maybe, I'm not an expert, but it seemed like they were selling $1 for less than $1 in a way. SaaS doesn't usually have that problem.
Yeah, makes sense. So Nick, let's move forward. With your experience building ChartMogul and seeing your own journey from 0 to X and your own customers, have you guys been able to find any metric that are like completely overlooked in the whole SaaS startup community in general?
If we find those, we usually try and add them to our product. Like gross MRR churn rate was one of them. Like, didn't seem to be much written about that. Everyone was just looking at the net and thinking how great it is to have negative churn. But we kind of realized that actually what's more useful to a management team internally is to look at the gross MRR churn rate. Or everybody was looking at the average revenue per customer, or the ARPU. But it's like, but the ARPU tends to move very slowly because you're looking at,
right. It's an average, so it's like it's obviously gonna.
Exactly. So we baked a different metric called average sale price, or ASP, into our product, where you can measure the average MRR at the time the customer converted, so the average sale price, and it changes every month. Like at the start of every month, it resets. It's like, so you might get you might get a massive customer at the start of the month, and it'll leap up, and it will kind of normalize throughout the month. So this is it gives you a much more like up to date view of actually like what is your average revenue per customer from new customers. I mean, you can also achieve the same thing with the old metric using our segmentation features, but anyway, that's another point.
So it's like a cohort analysis for each of the cohort that you have defined, and you're seeing MRR based on that.
But it's also just looking at the MRR at the time of purchase. So it doesn't it's not even taking into account upgrades or downgrades. It's just taking the snapshot of the time they purchased for a cohort. Yeah, exactly. Understood. Yeah, the ASP. Yeah. So I mean, those are two I can think of right now. There's probably more. I think customer lifetime is one that we're actually working on adding that to the product. That's one that I think is really, everyone talks about lifetime value. It's like everyone's heard of lifetime value, right? But not many people think about lifetime. It's like, if it's going to take you 5-10 years to get the value, then is that meaningful? And it's also like distribution as well. Like, you might have a huge lifetime value, but most of it's going to come in the third and fourth year of the subscription or something on average. And therefore, so looking at not just lifetime value, but also average lifespan of a subscription, and also how the revenue that you collect from your customer is distributed over time as well. I think like these things are important to look at when you actually think about, it's fine to, CAC to LTV sounds good, but kind of a bit more nuanced than that.
Makes sense. So Nick, we discussed earlier, so there are obviously multiple buckets for metrics depicting different parts of your business. So the metric that we just discussed, how to connect or relate those metrics, like all these metrics, MRR, CAC, LTV and everything, with product related metrics. So what do I mean by this is MRR, CAC, LTV, etc. Pit it against product metrics like user attributes, DAU, MAU, or whatever the North Star metric of the product team is using. So how to think around this?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure if it's always easy to do that. Especially I think it really depends on the business. If like W8, weekly active users, monthly active users, if it does, I mean, at some point it's going to correlate probably with revenue. But if you're going for a freemium model, it might be that you're seeing great growth in your freemium business, but you're not seeing the same growth in your so your weekly active users are dramatically increasing.
I was seeing
your MR is not.
I was seeing your product also, like ChartMogul, and I think you guys do this on many fronts. So like any key learning or pairings that you find there?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things you can do around segmentation. Like you can look at if you can pipe in customer attributes into ChartMogul that say things like what features have been activated or how many users the customer has on their account or something like that. Some meaningful things like have they used this feature? How many, if it's a CRM, how many opportunities have they created, or just anything about product usage or like that. And then you can start to segment on those metrics. So on those user attributes, you start to say, okay, show me my churn rate sliced by whether or not this feature was activated, or show me my churn rate for people that have added more than 3 users or less than 3 versus less than 3 users. So, and then you might be able to see, actually, you know what? Once we get one of our customers to activate this feature, and they have more than 3 customers in their account, the churn rate is like crazy low. And all the churn is happening for the customers that haven't got that far invested into the product.
Right.
And then that can help you to kind of focus the team around an effort to like, okay, let's improve the visibility and the onboarding of these specific features. Let's make it super easy for them to add more team members to their account.
Right.
Things like that. Things that might help more of their customers get that much invested. And then hopefully you'll see that, that will drive the churn down. So this is a way of helping you understand causing churn. I think that's probably off the top of my head, like the most insightful one I could think of right now.
Right.
I mean, we also do trial to paid conversion rate track. We do track leads and free trials in ChartMogul, and we do a trial to paid conversion rate metric as well. And so slicing the trial to paid conversion rate by some of those same attributes can be really helpful as well to see like, okay, do I have better conversion rates when, this feature has been activated, or what are the things that can happen in the product that could lead to a better conversion rate? So that's some of the stuff. I think segmentation tools can really help you. Custom attributes and segmentation tools can really help you.
Any advice would you like to give founders in like how should they think about SaaS metrics and any key fundamental mental models?
I'm not sure. I think I think basically like early stage founders, usually they know that the main thing to focus on is their product or service and making their customers happy. And those are the main things to focus on early days, and companies like ChartMogul can help them have one less thing to think about in a way.
Right.
By abstracting that part away, right? You should build versus buy, I suppose. Sorry, totally wrong. Buy versus build.
Exactly.
Buy versus build. Focus on the core competency of your business, not reinventing stuff that's already been done out there. So obviously some basic, one thing we try to do with our product is kind of make it so that you kind of, as you use the product, it also educates you about how to measure a subscription business in a way. So it's kind of like, it's kind of curates in a way and educates while you use the product. So you don't have to go away and read like a ton of blog posts and materials. It's good if you do, but you don't have to either.
Makes sense. Any resource you'd suggest to listeners, like books, people, courses, blogs, newsletter, anything?
Yeah, I mean, tons of stuff about metrics, specifically Point 9, David Skoke's For Entrepreneurs blog. SaaSter is really good, not as heavy on the metrics, but just great materials about just being a SaaS founder. Jason Lemkin materials, books. I was reading Play Bigger recently, which is a great book around category creation. It's an awesome book. And I was reading the founder of Zora's book, Subscribe, which is pretty cool as well. Anything
you would like to plug in, your Twitter, LinkedIn, and how can people reach out to you?
Sure, yeah. Twitter.com, Nick, NICK _Franklin. So Nick_Franklin is my Twitter handle. And our blog is blog.chartmogul.com to find out more. My email is nick@chartmogul.com if you want to send me an email directly.
Well, Nick, thank you so much for all the insights. It was a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you, Arun. Have a great evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye now. Bye.
That's it, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Show notes would be available in the link below, or you can just go to insightsalley.com/notes. Please rate, review, subscribe in whichever app you are listening to this episode. And most importantly, give feedback in comments, reviews, or you can just email me at arun@insightsalley.com. You can also follow and connect with me on Instagram, Twitter, etc. My handle everywhere is ARUN11192. And remember, always be learning. Bye.